Paula, thanks for coming and joining me for the gubernatorial roundtable discussion or neighborhood conversation about the 2017 governor's race here in Trenton, New Jersey, or excuse me, in the state of New Jersey. But we are in Trenton, New Jersey at the Mill Hill Saloon, one of my favorite locations to come. And I want to give a big shout out to owner Saeed and also to Amanda. The amazing
Amanda.
Friendly, all the time Amanda, who is hosting and opened up special for us. So thank you, Amanda.
Thank you all.
And also a shout out to my good friend Jeff Stewart, photographer, filmmaker, etc., who's capturing this. But the impetus behind this was that to have small group conversations about the gubernatorial election. This is the first time in 12 years that New Jersey is voting for an incumbent, or excuse me, not an incumbent, a new governor. The idea was to capture as much information locally as possible, hyper-local neighborhoods, and find out what the conversations are about, what people are thinking, some of the issues that are on their minds, etc. Now, since it's just you and I'm going to share some information about some of the larger questions that people have had, and I'd like for your honest feedback.
Sure.
And then I'd like to know what you're thinking about it and how it relates to you, not only on the grand scale for the whole state, but also for Mercer County, where we are, and also for the city of Trenton and Franklin Park, the neighborhood. The first thing I'd like to ask is, what have you heard about the candidates who are running?
I would say not a whole lot, frankly, and I don't know if that's because I'm sort of in my own little shell in life and I haven't searched out for a lot of information. I'm a Democrat, so I sort of looked at who the slate of folks were and how things fell out after the primary. So I sort of knew where I was going with my vote. But beyond that, I haven't really heard a lot, and I don't know if that's my fault, or if word's not getting out about the election as much as it should be. And quite frankly, we're not talking a lot about the election because I think at least where I work and the people that I socialize with, we're kind of trying to deal with the day-to-day of the current national administration. I feel like what's happening on a local and state level is sort of taking sort of not being focused on for that reason. It's like every day we're being confronted by some new frustration, at least given my political persuasion. I feel really upset by what's happening in the country, and I think that's taking a lot of my focus.
And it's obvious, and it's obvious that you feel that way. That's right.
Yeah.
And we'll talk a bit more about the national election or the national presidency and how that has and is affecting you. When I held the first one, it was almost the same mentioning. Most folks it wasn't really on their radar. It wasn't really that interesting, and very little marketing was seen, whether it's billboards, heard advertisings on radios, or saw them on television. And it sounds like you feel the same way. You haven't been bombarded like, hey, it's a big election. Is that correct?
Yeah, especially in, I would say, my local community. I think when I drive through Hamilton, which I sometimes have to do, I see a lot of people have put up the placards for their candidates, mostly the local elections, but I haven't really seen much more than that. Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe my media and social media choices have maybe also, I've restricted what I might hear of. But I don't know, how about you? Do you feel like you're hearing a lot?
Well, I haven't heard a lot, especially when I think about the previous elections.
Yeah.
It seems to me as almost
Christie.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It appears to me, from my perspective, that this is almost a given. Who's going to win? And it's almost as if both candidates who are running.
Win?
Yeah, hold on.
Okay.
So I mean, literally, that's how I feel. I feel as though it's almost statewide and also maybe even nationally, given that one particular candidate is going to win. And just based upon most recent information that I've seen, Phil Murphy has a double-digit point lead over Kim Godana and has raised almost 3 times as much money, if I'm correct, 3 times as much money as she has in her campaign. So I guess there's a scientific way that they can figure out who's going to win based upon that. And I'm wondering if that has something to do with the amount of marketing that we're seeing. Like they're not spending money on marketing because it's almost a given. Now, maybe for another time we can have a conversation about what that really says about the populace here, which kind of worries me that people who are in elected positions can know that they can get to a certain threshold and they know whether or not they're going to win or they're going to lose and how much effort they're going to put into it. Because I feel if they have that as an ideology, then what else are they doing during their political time where they say, okay, well, we know we just need to reach this point, and once we reach this, we're going to be able to do whatever it is we want to do. But that'd be something that we can discuss at another time. So going back to the 2 candidates, Kim Godana, who has close ties to Governor Christie and is a Republican, do you think that that has guided your thought process at all about even considering voting for her?
Her relationship to Chris Christie?
Yes, and the Republican Party?
And the party, absolutely. I'm a lesbian, and I feel, I guess, I don't want to say that that's the place where I start, but I worry about my rights, and I worry about the way people that are sort of outside people that are outsiders, either in society, how they are treated, and I don't feel necessarily that I can trust people who are looking out for the outsider.
Now, when you say that, and thank you for being candid.
Yeah.
So,
I was candid, but not very articulate. As you can tell, I'm sure that my face started to flush as I started to talk about it. Yeah.
But thank you.
Yeah,
but thank
absolutely.
you for being candid. So when you consider the outsiders, and I'm using air quotes for the folks who are just listening.
Sure.
Who would you include in that group? I mean, you made it clear, okay,
Sure.
people who have what's considered, again, air quotes, alternative sexual
Just a sexual
thoughts,
orientation that's not
exactly.
heterosexual. Certainly, folks in the trans community. I would also lump into this. I have a great care and concern for people of color and people with low economic status, immigrants.
Okay. Now let's shift, and we'll come back to some of those particular groups, and if not now, we can have that conversation later. But some of the main questions have been around tax reform. New Jersey is it is the most densely populated, most ethnically and culturally diverse state. But it's also heavily taxed. So taxes are always an issue. And I remember, just yesterday, we were having a conversation, you and your partner, Patrice, we were having a conversation about property taxes here in Trenton, New Jersey.
We just purchased a house for the first time. So I'm almost 50 years old and a first-time homeowner. So I didn't have to ever really deal with the concept of property taxes per se. I was a renter for forever. So I'm sure that you're referencing when we started looking, we knew we wanted to move into Trenton. We learned a lot about how Trenton is taxed because it's the state capital and because of a lot of the nonprofits in town. We found that we were looking at a variety of neighborhoods, and some of the neighborhoods that we were looking at, we could afford the home potentially, but we could not afford the tax burden of the home. Some of the houses that we looked at had $10,000 tax bills for the year, and so that definitely affected where we could choose to live.
So both candidates have different tax plans that they're looking to introduce, and they're also both very veiled in the particulars, which oftentimes happens, and for whatever reason. But Phil Murphy's idea is to tax millionaires. What are your thoughts about proposing taxes on people who have more? And to dumb it down, the thought of, okay, if you have more, then you would think that you have the capability to do more or to pay more. So thoughts about that?
No, I absolutely feel that way. I do feel that way that if you have more, you're starting at a higher platform.
In addition to that, I mean, one of Murphy and Guadagno, they both have mentioned that they think towns and communities and even counties should consider consolidation in some capacity, whether that's total consolidation or maybe utilities or things like that. Any thoughts around that? So let me bring it back and I'll give you a couple of examples. You work in Princeton.
I do indeed.
So Princeton went through a consolidation.
Princeton Borough and the Princeton Township.
And since you spent a great deal of time at Princeton, have you noticed any changes in services?
The thing that impacted me the most related to the borough and the townships, this is going to sound so petty, but the difference in parking and parking fees. So I work at a theater in town right next to Princeton University, when would it be the township when it was township and borough, I could find a place to park that was nearby and walking distance, that I could park my car pretty much for free and walk to my job. And parking is a premium in Princeton, as you well know. So I work for a nonprofit arts firm. It was really great to be able to have this free parking. And when they consolidated, suddenly where we were parking was no longer free. So that's the biggest impact that it's had on my life. I'm sure that the people that live in Princeton probably have a wider range of experience of how that has helped.
So in other places in New Jersey, Camden, for example, the city of Camden, which has a lot of similarities, not so much now, but previously with Trenton, a post-industrial city, a lot of economic depression, other issues. They went through a process where they ended their police force and they went countywide. So when they went countywide, there was a lot of concern. Oh, look at this wonderful meatloaf.
Amanda.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Amanda.
Meatloaf.
Tilt that for the camera.
It's gorgeous.
So they disbanded their police force and went countywide, and there was a lot of concerns about how that would look. But to date, there don't appear to be any issues. It seems as though Camden appears to be on an upswing. They've even secured Subaru is going to be moving their North American headquarters there. A lot of positive activity. So when you consider the consolidation of that,
well, if I think there's examples that show that it has worked and that it's a benefit and that there's no backsliding, then it sounds as if it's a good idea, but I can't speak about it beyond what you're sharing with me.
Okay, great. So yesterday, several people, about 24 people or so, or a dozen people or so got together and walked.
We did.
And we were navigating a neighborhood.
East Ward.
Yep, the North Ward, but East Trenton.
East Trenton. Yeah, how does that work? You'll
I have
have to
no
explain
idea.
that to me. We had that conversation in the car ride.
So while we were doing that,
Yes.
we were noticing some environmental issues.
Yep.
And that is another issue that has been proposed to both gubernatorial candidates, the environment.
Right.
A few years ago we had Superstorm Sandy, which is recently found out that there are still well over 1,000 families that are not in their homes several years after this storm. There's issues with how FEMA, the federal government, has handled the finances to these families, et cetera. So you can see why the environment is something that's on a lot of people's minds. Murphy has proposed to offset some of the costs by creating a wind farm off the coast of New Jersey. And it appears as though he's pretty excited about that, and he's looking into that as an option. Whereas Kim Guadagno is opposed to that idea. What are your thoughts about that? about alternative energy and particularly wind farms off the coast?
I think alternative energy is a great idea, something that's sustainable, and certainly the wind is sustainable. I'm wondering why she opposes the wind farm.
Well, I can tell you one article, NJ.com said that she was opposed to it because of a concern with tourism.
And the way that they look.
Yes.
We've heard this. Where was it? Was it on the West Coast, where there was, or maybe it was down in the Gulf of Mexico, where they wanted to put one up, and they were so concerned. I feel like we need alternative forms of energy, and if it's worried about the way that the waterfront the view from a waterfront property, then I just don't understand that sometimes the benefit of something outweighs great scenery.
Do you think that fundamentally that's the difference between the two parties?
I have to say I don't know enough, but I do think, at least on a national level, not wanting to fully commit to admitting that global warming exists is an aspect of some conservative circles, which I think is a challenge. I challenge that. I think that's one fundamental difference that we've seen. I think we have to believe in science, and I think we have to try and address the issues now before we have greater negative impacts. Does that answer your question?
No, it does, and I appreciate that. I mean, because generally, I find that most people, when they answer it, they come from a position of just raw emotion.
Oh,
like
I've got emotion.
But raw emotion,
Yeah.
like, no, we need this, or we don't need this. It's a hoax. It's not real.
Right.
But to hear it, it's refreshing to hear you say, well, look, let's just consider what the facts are.
Right.
You know, let's consider what the scientists are saying, et cetera.
Also, in my mind, I wasn't able to get it out in that first response too, is this, like, I think that sometimes people are more concerned about, like, money, and the people that have money, and they want to keep things how they are, and not addressing, like, I'm just thinking of the wind farms and how, well, I love the way, when I sit at the beach on Ocean City, New Jersey, I love how it looks, but if I know that something's benefiting our society, this form of sustainable energy, then I say, okay, maybe a windmill can be beautiful as well. Let's have the artists make them.
I like that. So I'd also like to...
With the engineers.
Oh, yeah,
engineers.
absolutely.
Yeah, of course.
We'll have a repurposed wind farm
Right.
going up somewhere. The money that Phil Murphy has been raising, it's been documented that he's got a large support of women who are supporting his candidacy. Do you have any thoughts about why you think that is happening? Why women are flocking towards Murphy and the Democratic ticket?
I don't know per se why that would be happening.
Do you have?
I wonder if it's a backlash based upon our most recent election, our national election, I didn't go to Washington to march in front of the White House the day after the inauguration, but I marched in Trenton, concerned about women's experience in this country and families. I did vote for Hillary Clinton, and I just wonder if it's concern based upon what happened with that election and with the current president of the United States, and people wanting to, or women wanting to ensure someone to temper that, at least on the state level. I would also say I think Mr. Christie might have a lot to do with that as well. his sort of aggressive nature, also his support of the candidate who became president. I do wonder if that's one of the reasons why women are hoping, although Guadagno is a woman, but she still is a Republican, I think maybe.
And do you think the trickle down of the relationship with Trump, with Christie, to her, do you think that has some ramifications?
I mean, when I think of of Christie, I think of her as part of, you know, I thought of them as a duo. I mean, again, when I hear Guadagno, I think of Christie, so I'm sure that has a backlash for her as well. Are you saying that, are the polls showing that women that had previously voted Republican are leaning toward Murphy?
No.
Okay.
It's just, and that's a good point.
Yeah.
To look into that, but it's the article mentioned, and I didn't go into a lot of in-depth thinking or research, but it said that women are flocking to Murphy in support of his campaign. Yeah. So, and my thought and concern about it is that as this progresses, what would be the threshold for women to say we've had enough of
men? I'm just kidding. No.
well, I'm sure that you and I probably know some women who feel that way.
Yeah.
But
not I.
but I say that you know, with the attitudes and the actions of our president, the boisterous attitude of our soon-to-be former governor.
Yeah.
This amount of information that's coming out in the private sector now with Weinstein and others.
And the Me Too, hashtag Me Too.
Yes,
yeah.
and it just seems like there's this growing amount of energy of women kind of galvanizing themselves to say, okay, look, we've had enough. We need to be heard. We need to be at the table, et cetera.
Right.
And I'm wondering how that will.
We need our health care.
Yeah, and our health choices.
We need to maintain our constitutional rights. Yeah.
So when I think about that, and I think about it in the context of the gubernatorial election here in New Jersey, I wonder how that plays into it. Because again, New Jersey, it's a wealthy state, it's complex, it's diverse, and it's in a very amazing part of the country, you know, where a large amount of wealth is accumulated. Anything you'd like to add to that? Because, and I'm not quite sure of the question that I'm trying to ask, but I'm thinking again, okay, we've got Trump, we've got Christie, we've got Weinstein, we've got things coming out in the media, and there's all this energy, and it just seems as though right now the media is very focused on how women are being treated by men in authority, and I'm wondering how that, in your opinion, could or is going to play out in this election.
Yeah. It would be so great to have a Republican woman here to respond to that question because I'm sure, you know, that someone that's not voting for Phil Murphy still is upset about, you know, the kind of current climate and the way people are communicating from the White House, you know, things that are happening, all of the stories coming out about sexual harassment and abuse of women by authority figures. I'm sure we would feel the same way about it. We're just voting for different candidates.
Okay. So let's transition and talk about another subject that is on the minds of a lot of people, and that's social justice issues.
Yes, sir.
It's not only the social justice issues have really taken a premier position in national and international media, and I'll say, you know, with Colin Kaepernick and the allegiance to the flag supposedly, and now there's owners of professional teams who have gotten involved in this as well. So when you think about social justice, and think about in the context of what you're experiencing in the groups that you're affiliated with, how do you look at that and the governor's race in New Jersey? And if you want, I can give you a couple of specifics.
I think I'd love that. I
So-
think I'm learning more about our candidates from you, which I'm appreciative
Okay.
of. Also shows my ignorance, which I will admit freely.
So, social justice issues, the incarceration
Oh,
rates.
no, I know what social justice
No, no.
issues are. Okay,
But
I'm sorry.
how do you look at that? And how would you, how is that going to help you decide on who you're going to vote for?
Right. Would hope that I'd be looking at a candidate who is addressing issues of systemic racism and putting forth policies that are aware of systemic racism, and also looking to find ways to help returning citizens come back to our cities and our towns and remake their lives so that they can be benefits to our society. I'm looking for a candidate who's compassionate and understanding of all of the issues, and specifically well-versed on systematic racism, but also aware of privilege for people like me who are white. Just an awareness of it and a sensibility that actually is addressed in policy.
Good point. So, throughout the nation, multiple states and municipalities have come up with different ways of either legalizing marijuana, and let's just say cannabis. I was educated that marijuana is not the proper term. We should be using the scientific name, cannabis.
Okay. And that is because
Marijuana is used. That term is considered racist, and it's based upon a policy that the government was enforced to make it illegal,
back in the
and
20s
that
or-
and that Latino Hispanics and Mexicans
Oh, I had no idea.
preferably were rapists and all these other things, which is an interesting tie-in.
to
to our
systematic
current-
racism.
Tie
Yeah.
into our the terminology that our current president has used.
Yes.
So the idea about marijuana, either legalization, decriminalization, recreation use, as a marketplace, et cetera, there's different levels of it all over the country. Colorado is probably the one example where everyone points to the amount of money that they've generated there. Both candidates have said that they will look into decriminalizing or having a different having a policy change towards cannabis or marijuana.
Right.
What are your thoughts about that?
I saw this great documentary on PBS a few years ago about like kind of the history of cannabis. Thank you. And about how it became a political battle, and I've never used it myself, and I say that. I kind of grew up as a teetotaler. Here I am drinking my seltzer. But I've seen documentaries and heard people talk about the medicinal value of it. I know a number of people who have kind of grown up in that time period where it was vilified and would benefit it now and would have great alleviation of a lot of pain and negative symptoms from illness. On the recreational level, I'm not sure, but I'd love for it to be more available for people to be able to use it, especially for medicinal purposes. And so I think it should be looked at for sure. I'm happy to hear that both candidates are interested in it. I do wonder how it will be politicized in terms of economics. And what that could mean to the state. I know that my home state of Massachusetts just recently made it legal, but I haven't heard any word about how that's going. So.
And I think that's another conversation that I would like to have you included in, because that has been a big concern. People see the financial benefits of it in places like California and also in Colorado. But then when you think about how that's going to look here Is it just going to be another marketplace where the wealthy will continue to get more wealthy because it's just
Right.
another opportunity for them? And will it get the opportunity for it to be used medicinally
Right.
to help people who are in need? Without going into a lot of detail, I know that there was a lot of conversation about the approach that Christie took as a former prosecutor and being very hard-nosed taking a very hard line about cannabis and marijuana legalization, but then seeing a lot of publicity about children who had to leave the state to go get treatments for medicinal marijuana and cannabis and the benefits that they had. So that's another conversation I'd like to look into.
I also wonder if that didn't also result from his personal experience with was it a sibling that had an addiction,
Yeah.
and that. So I wonder if that personal experience made that hard line even harder.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because this is we're getting close to the final few questions I have
Sure.
for you. So when you have someone who's an elected official, of course you want them to represent themselves because of their personal
Sure.
experience, who they are. But what
Can't
are your
separate
thoughts?
them, right.
But what are your thoughts about when that becomes the driving force and not what the people who voted
Want.
that person into office? What are your thoughts about that? So to make it in a more of a question,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts about elected officials whose personal experience and agenda is the driving force as opposed to the wants of the people who've elected them?
Well, it would be ideal if they all went together, right? I think that's the ideal that we're looking for, but we don't have so many candidates that we get to choose who aligns with ours, right? Who, like specifically who aligns, right? We have two candidates we have more than two candidates right now. But of the major parties, we only get to choose from two people. There's no way that you're going to align fully with someone. So you choose what's most important to you, right? I think you can't separate yourself from your personal experience per se. Hopefully you're not going to be a hypocrite with what you're doing, right? And I think there's also room for people to change because of personal experience. I don't know if I'm actually answering your question.
No, I think you are. And
Okay.
I think for the audience, they'll get it. I think that what you're saying is ideally you would love to have someone who would represent the people 100%.
Right.
But you can't. I mean,
Right.
we're all human
Because-
beings.
and we're all
there's
different, and
yes.
we all have different needs. And
But the focus of that elected official should not be their own driving force.
right, they
It-
have
it
to be
should-
still thinking about the people, right? Yeah.
Okay. All right. And final for today, and we're just focusing on the two major candidates and nothing against the other candidates, but this is based upon those other candidates they are not really part of the full discussion. I'm not saying that they're not valued, but for the sake of this, we're just speaking about the two major party candidates, Kim Guadagno and Phil Murphy. If you could have a conversation, just like you and I are right now, with one-on-one with them, what are some of the questions that you'd like to have them answer for you?
Well, I think because I just moved to Trenton and chose to move to Trenton, love to ask them what would they like to see for Trenton. Here it is, the state capital, and in many ways, I feel like this city full of beautiful people. Is struggling. It's struggling for leadership. It's struggling for consistent, strong, compassionate leadership. And it's not just the place where the Capitol stands and where people leave on the weekends. I want to know what they would want for for the city as the capital city. That's one thing that I'm interested in.
Paula, that's been fantastic. Thank you so much.
I wish I was more articulate.
So Jacques Howard here, Trenton 365 show, sharing the information about the 2017 New Jersey gubernatorial election in a neighborhood discussion here in Mill Hill Saloon in Trenton, New Jersey. Take my tour of Trenton. Send me an email, trenton365show@gmail.com, and we'll hope to see you soon. Take care.